Hi everybody, my name again is Darren Wilsey, and I feel very honored to be speaking with you via Skype. I'm out here in Irvine, California, and a couple of weeks ago I was asked to come on board and talk to you guys about a book that I recently wrote called The Musician's Guide to Licensing Music. And I just wanted to spend a little time going over the whole licensing process, because I know it's an area that a lot of musicians frequently express interest in pursuing. So, and also I'd like to invite you guys to feel free to, at any point, ask questions if you have any. And if I maybe skip over something, which I'm bound to do, I'm happy to go over it in more detail if it helps you out. I've been playing music for about 30 years. I started very young and, you know, just always adored music. And having been involved with it now for a fairly considerable amount of time, it's been interesting to see how it's evolved and how the emphasis has changed. When I first started out, the whole goal was to be able to, you know, play an instrument well. And for me, my primary goal was to be able to play some Led Zeppelin songs. But it gradually developed into other things and other areas. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I'm a musician like you. And what's kind of unique about the book is this. It's a book by a musician for musicians. One of the issues that I ran into when I would go into like Barnes & Noble or I don't know, border books, these stores that, you know, they sell music, CDs, but they also sell books, and they have nice music sections, is that most music industry books, from my vantage point, it seemed like they were always written by either publishers or lawyers or former record executive CEOs, and the advice and the information they provided was very accurate in an academic sense or in a legal sense, but I always felt like it kind of skipped over some of the most important details, which have to do with creativity, have to do with, you know, all the processes that lead one to write a song that eventually has a market. And so I decided at some point that it would be interesting to have a book that's for musicians, that's basically a no BS approach to the whole licensing process. That, by the way, is very important to me in that I wanted this to be honest. And I share 10 years worth of information that, you know, it's the good, bad, and the ugly. And the truth of the matter is that most opportunities are somewhere in the middle. We have a tendency to project our own emotions onto an opportunity and hope that they, you know, lead to that big break. And most of the time that doesn't happen. There really isn't any one opportunity that will probably make or break your career. And the real key seems to be longevity. So you just keep chipping away at it, and eventually you start to amass a credit list. So in any case, about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I would start working with some other artists in a new capacity, and that was to actually represent their music along with my own catalog for various licensing opportunities in the world of television and film. And that turned out to be a real eye-opening experience. There was a proverbial eureka moment. In representing other artists, I sort of had a chance to deal with artists in a way that was, you know, they weren't bandmates, and they weren't, you know, people that, you know, maybe we were performing, you know, get together or on the same bill. I mean, these were people that were, for the first time, looking at me for career advice and to pursue opportunities on their behalf. And it was very interesting because I had a chance to experience firsthand some of the mistakes in my mind that they were making dealing with me. And I would think, you know, if they're acting this way with me, then chances are excellent that if they just were cold calling somebody with the interest in pursuing an opportunity that they may not be received with a lot of excitement. So in any case, sometimes in order to understand any system, any business, it's very helpful to wear different hats. And that's probably the thing that is interesting about my background, is that I've had an opportunity to do a little bit of everything. From being a musician who's toured the U.S., played in indie bands on record labels. I've composed movie scores, produced other artists, worked for a company that managed artists. So I've had a chance to sort of experience, in some cases in a limited capacity, but at least experience a little bit of everything. So I think it's really important to understand how the business works from both points of view. As an artist, your concern is that someone will hear your songs and take notice and hopefully do something with them. But in the world of licensing, some of the rules that I think or preconceived notions that most musicians have are they're not the same. There's definitely a different set of rules. And the first rule is this: they're licensing content. So their primary concern is this song correct for the situation where we use it? Does it contain the right lyrical content? Does it have the right tempo? Does it have male vocals or female vocals? Sometimes that's an issue. Is it the right style? Does it complement our product? Whatever it might be, there's all sorts of factors that go into the decision as to, do we license this piece of music or not? And what's left off to the side are all these things like, what does the artist look like? Do they have a following? Is there a buzz? Can they play the best venue in town and sell it out? Those things matter a lot, I suppose, if you're pursuing a record deal, where the emphasis is both on your songs, but also have you pounded the pavement? Have you built up the following? With licensing music, that doesn't necessarily matter at all. It really just comes down to the integrity and how your song aligns with the message of the video content. So I think that the other thing to keep in mind is that when you're licensing music for use in multimedia, whether it's TV, film, commercials, web commercials, these sort of things, it becomes encapsulated in a bigger presentation in a sense. It's part of something else. So it's oftentimes used in more of a background capacity, although not always. There's so many different ways music gets used today. It's very difficult to turn on the television or any electronic device without hearing music. So that's very exciting. But it's also overwhelming in the sense that it seems like there's so many places that are potentially licensing music. Where do you begin? I think the stigma that at one time was associated with licensing songs maybe dates back to like the 1970s or 80s. And back in those days, if you ever watch an old TV show from that period of time, you'll notice something interesting. There's very little music in old television shows. You have theme song, and every once in a while you'll have a little incidental music, but it's not like today, where, again, music always seems to be in the background for most, especially reality television. Back then, the stigma was this: if a band or an artist was licensing their songs for some TV show, it was a clear indication that maybe things weren't going well. They weren't really selling records, so they needed some other way to expose their songs. I know when I first started pursuing music licensing, which was maybe about 10 years ago, even then the emphasis was clearly on, if you're an artist or a band, it was chasing a record deal. And licensing songs just seemed obscure, and it was very difficult for most people to even understand why you want to do it. Now, if you fast forward to today, what's interesting is it's become, in my opinion, it's moved to the forefront. It's one of the few ways that you can actually take your digitally recorded content and have it generate revenue. I mean, sure, you can sell your songs on iTunes and play gigs, but I think that for most artists, I'm speaking generally, that the opportunities that licensing offers, at least in a monetary sense, have potential to dwarf these other things. So if there was a stigma with it, I think it's been mitigated just by the fact that everybody's involved with it. That being said, that's one of the challenges. The do-it-yourself indie music revolution obviously has encouraged people to do as much as they can on their own, whether it's record their own songs, produce their own songs, sell their own songs, distribute them. Sometimes it's a one-man operation. The challenge, though, is this: even though some of the entry-level barriers have been eliminated, right? It's sort of like everyone can apply. You still have to show up with a really nice suit to make an impression at the interview, so to speak. And that being said, it's actually raised the standards. It's very difficult sometimes to tell if something's an indie band or a major label artist because they both sound really good. So the production standard is shot through the roof. There was a time when you hear things like, well, we'll take indie music. It's okay if it's just broadcast quality, which was sort of a lesser standard than, say, record quality. But you never hear that anymore. It's sort of like it just has to sound really good, which brings up a whole slew of challenges. Most people learn to play the bass or drums or guitar or piano because they are interested in being a musician. But today's marketplace and just all the dynamics that have evolved by virtue of technology requires that you sort of have a more general or a generalist approach. Yeah, you have to be a musician, but you also have to start worrying about how to use all this technology to record it and to promote yourself. So, and what that does is it eats into your time, right? So you don't get something for nothing, and the expense is time. It's incredibly time intensive to make a decent recording that's well recorded, well performed, and compelling enough to elicit some interest. So,
do you think it's fair or safe or dangerous to now look at licensing another vehicle
for promoting?
Yeah, for promoting your band or for exposing your band?
Yeah, I think for those who are trying to sell it as a get-rich-quick operation or something like this, yeah, it's presented as a way to generate exposure, which is true on more than one level. The first way is that some television shows will, for example, during the closing credits, right, they'll actually have little cards that will show a band and make a reference to their website, like Grey's Anatomy. So if you have a huge audience watching a popular show and they like the songs, they're going to go to iTunes and check it out. It would be very difficult to generate that much traffic to iTunes or your website by virtue of playing at a local nightclub. So it actually is potentially a good exposure opportunity. But I say potentially because it doesn't always play out like that. Exposure is probably the most valuable commodity in the entertainment business. People will use it as like a doggy treat. Oh, this is a good exposure opportunity, therefore you should, let us use your songs for free. Or, do so at an unreasonable discount. Because it will expose you as an artist. If you're given that as a sales pitch, I think it's really important that you clearly define and hold someone accountable to the steps that they can take that will ensure at least some exposure does come out of it. So, in any case, the other aspect of exposure, which is, I guess a little more financial in nature, is that it exposes an artist's potential revenue streams that, again, might be difficult to generate via other mechanisms. For example, when you license a song, right, for use in a television show or a movie, the licensing agreements have to be addressed beforehand, before broadcast, before exhibition in the theater. And that's one aspect of fees, right? People pay for that right to include your content as part of their presentation. And then the second component is what happens once it does broadcast, and which includes radio, incidentally. The radio, television, or anything that's considered public performance generates what's called performance royalties, which are distributed by performing rights organizations like ASCAP, EMI, CSAC, or there's many others depending on where you're from. So, in any case, it leads to a good point on how does the licensing process work when someone says, hey, we're producing a film and we'd love to use your song. Most of the time, there's going to be two licenses that you'll encounter, and I just want to quickly explain the difference. So, in order to do that, I'm just going to show you two things, okay? Obviously, this is a CD, right? Okay? And then here, I don't know if you can see this, it's a music score, okay? Now, you probably are wondering, okay, big deal. Well, what's the difference? Well, there's two licenses that go hand in hand in TV and film, right? The master license and the synchronization license. And there's sometimes some confusion as to, well, what is what? Well, when you look at a music score and a CD, what you realize is they're both mechanisms for music. However, they're different. A CD, right, is a captured component. It's someone recorded a piece of music, and it's unique in the sense that there's only one moment in time where this particular performance took place. You can obviously have many different recordings of the same piece of music, but this one here is unique. It's my band playing the song, not the band down the street. Now, so when you encounter master licenses, right? What you're licensing there are master recordings. You're acquiring the right to use a specific recording for a TV show or a film, or really any form of digital media. So master recording is the recording. Let me say that again. The master license addresses the master recording. Now the other license is the synchronization license, okay? And that deals with the abstraction of the composition, okay? And that's why I use a music score, because what it sort of signifies is this. You can write a piece of music and it can exist, and it doesn't rely on a recording to prove that it exists. It can be written down in score form. It can be written down as like a lead sheet. It could just be memorized and just something that you perform for friends. So a synchronization license is the right to use a composition in synchronization with moving pictures. Is usually the way it's explained in the contracts. But in any case, both of them have to be addressed. Now, in the old days, like, again, back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, licensing a song was a fairly complicated process. And it was a fairly expensive process, too. Because if you were Joe Filmmaker, you would have to go and chase down whoever the person or persons or people who control the copyright of the composition, right? And that might be a publisher, it might be an artist, it might be some other third party. So, and then in order to clear the master recording, you go to a record companies, okay? So I'd say in the most general sense, you have to think of it this way. Publishers are generally those who deal with the composition, and record companies generally are those who address the master license. Now that's all changed. That's not so much the case anymore. If you have made a demo of your song, you are in effect both the publisher and the record company. So it's interesting to note that now the burden of all of this terminology and confusion is often bestowed upon the indie artists. So I just want to point out that those are the two main contracts that come up. And I also point out in the book that it's definitely worth getting an attorney if it's your first licensing deal, so you can kind of work through some of the issues. Most licensing deals share a lot of similarities in terms of the legalese they contain. But there are distinctions, and as an artist, you really want to believe that when someone is interested in licensing your song, that it's a good opportunity, and you're optimistic that it will generate exposure, and for all you know, maybe a little bit of money as well. What a lawyer brings into the fold is a healthy dose of pessimism, and to balance out what is normally delusional exuberance. And I say this, jokingly, but they're trained to find things or to worry about the day that may never come, but it's important that it is taken into account, because every situation that I've ever dealt with, no two are quite the same. And sometimes an opportunity that seems very, it doesn't seem like it will amount to much, can turn out to be something, very unique. And other situations that seem so important or so big, are disappointments in the end. So you can't really predict that. But one of the interesting areas of these contracts that I think needs more development is to quantify this notion of exposure. Because if the licensing fees are going to be either negotiated downward from the artist perspective, then what are they getting in return? It's very loose language, like, the company will make best effort to, maybe to include the song. But, I mean, there are things they can do. For example, they can include, if the movie ends up having a website, they can include a link to your band's website. He even goes so far as to ask that, you guys perform at the movie premiere. Or, just cool things like that. There's always ways to make these opportunities beneficial, regardless of what happens to, no one can predict whether a CD or a movie or a TV show will ultimately, experience a great deal of success. It's the X factor, and it applies to all things creative. So I just think it's important to keep that in mind, because in the beginning, you can either be completely optimistic, and conversely, if you've had some experience, you can be completely jaded and not, be excited at all, because you're convinced that everyone's just out to, screw you. And, the truth of the matter is, 90% of the people I work with that have been, good, honest people, that are like us. They have a vision, they have something that they want, a story they want to tell, or, something they want to expose to. So, I would approach it as, you guys are working together. And of course, there's always worst case scenarios, but by and large, most people that I've dealt with have been very honest and, do the best they can with what they have.
Can you sort of back down and get straight into some of the nuts and bolts? This all seems still very far away and very unattainable. Are there people that you approach first that help you get to where you go?
Yeah, I think backing way up, the priority when you're dealing with licensing content, right, as I sort of mentioned before, is songs, right? Your haircut's not going to matter, your attire and stage charisma, these things for licensing as a pure entity are not probably going to have an impact. So one thing that a lot of bands, a lot of musicians and other people tend to forget is that songwriting is an art form that is mutually exclusive from musicianship, right? And you might spend a lot of time learning how to play an instrument and a lot of time rehearsing with your band, but the craft of songwriting is something worth spending some time getting to know. And it doesn't necessarily require, for example, take music theory classes or anything, but it really requires that you find music that inspires, you think is really excellent, and listen to it from an analytical point of view. Try and figure out what makes this song so incredible. And with a lot of licensing opportunities, the person who wants to that's looking for music, they will reference some song. Maybe it's a Rolling Stones song, or it could be anything. And it's worth noting, what is it about that song that would appeal to them? Because they're basically looking for you to provide something that's similar in nature. So, again, going back to the beginning, ultimately, licensing isn't going to have any meaning until you have songs recorded. You have to have content that's available. It can't be abstract. So only when you have songs that have been recorded can you start pursuing those opportunities. A lot of issues will stem back to this point. For example, who wrote the song? Or was it just you? Was it you and someone else in your band? Because that gets into who owns the copyright. It's going to be a huge issue with any licensing deal. The entitled parties, the people who own the copyright of the song, and the people who own the copyright of the recording. Now, if you're a one-person operation, it's you and your piano and a microphone in your room making, demoing the songs, then you're in essence the person who owns the master. You're the person who owns the composition. They can deal with you in a one-stop capacity. If you're in a band, that dynamic is obviously, can be in flux. Sometimes, several people can contribute to one song. Another song, maybe there's only one writer. But maybe in terms of the recording, you all pitched in. So your equal owners on the master. And these are details that a lot of people don't think about. But they become very important when there's a deal on the table because it needs to be clarified for the purpose of being correct and fair. One of the most common questions people will ask when the idea of copyright comes up is, they think of copyright in terms of protecting them from someone else stealing their song idea, right? You've got a song with a certain hook and a certain type of, melody or chorus, and copyright protection prevents anybody else from basically, stealing that song. That's true, okay? But for the purpose of licensing, pursuing copyright protection from that angle, that's a very difficult thing to prove. You have to show that people have access to your song to steal it, that there's compelling similarity. You would have to find someone who's a district attorney who's willing to take the case to federal court because copyright is a federal, or copyright infringement is a federal offense. It's a very long, drawn-out process, and at the end of the day, you may not necessarily feel like you're that far ahead. Now, a much more relevant component of copyright protection is, you've got a song, and you realize one day you're watching TV, and a TV show suddenly, features your song, and you're like, what? I never even knew they were going to use it. I don't even remember, signing an agreement. Now that's very clear cut because the company has basically exhibited your copyrighted material in public. So it's much more clear that it's been exhibited in a public capacity without your permission. So what licensing comes down to is you're basically, as a copyright owner, or as a representative of someone else's copyright, you're giving permission. That's what a license is. You're giving someone permission to use a song as part of another presentation. It's different from publishing. Publishing agreements have to do with transfer of copyright. When you sign a publishing deal, you're telling a publisher, okay, I'm transferring part of this or all of this copyright from me to you, in exchange for something, maybe some monetary advance, and for your time and energy exploring future opportunity. Licenses don't deal with that. There should not be, in most situations, the notion of copyright transfer for a licensing agreement. So that's a point that a lot of people sometimes confuse, where they might think of licensing and publishing are related. They're only related in the sense that in order to license a song, you're going to have to deal with whoever publishes the song and whoever owns the master recordings. I know I keep hammering this point, but it's really important.
The question was, living in a city that's outside of sort of a major media hub where there are a lot of movies and TV studios, is it worth it to use the resource of this taxi to sort of get yourself into those circles? And I think
that's a great question. And it comes up a lot. This is a good example of how the dynamic of the whole business has changed. You know, this idea that, you know, you have to be in New York or Nashville or LA in order to, you know, have a shot. For licensing, again, I really don't buy into that anymore. I think that, you know, so long as your songs are well recorded and they're sincere, and style doesn't matter. There's opportunity for every style of music, you can imagine, right? I don't think location is an issue. I think accessibility. So you do have to make it available somehow, whether it's, you know, through a third-party website that deals with licensing, or your own. Or, you know, there was a period of time, you know, back when MySpace was a little more in vogue, where, you know, people would go through different, you know, MySpace pages and find cool songs, and, you know, they would get licensed that way. The truth of the matter is that it's always evolving. You know, what's very trendy today, or like, you know, may not be so useful for you later. Taxi is an interesting platform because one of the things they claim to provide is they pre-screen music, which, you know, ensures things such as, you know, that it's decent quality, and that, you know, and that it's also easily cleared, right? In other words, they do some of the preliminary footwork for the production company. So it is, listen, anything is useful if it yields results. I mean, one of the things about a service like Taxi is that it is a service. Therefore, it comes with, you know, the expense of paying for the service. To their credit, though, at least this is my understanding, they don't, should they seize an opportunity on your behalf, they don't ask for, you know, any commission beyond, you know, the you know, your annual service fee. So that's good. There's all sorts of business arrangements, and you have to sometimes make sure people don't double dip. You know, where you're paying for a service, where they're going to send your songs out and try and get them licensed. That's one thing, and they want money up front for that, regardless of the outcome. There's other companies that don't charge you anything, right? And the idea is, I call these put up or shut up arrangements, where they agree to market your songs, and if and only if they end up seizing or brokering a deal, they would get a commission on that particular opportunity. So that's another common arrangement, probably the most common as of today. Another thing that I've noticed is that, well, this changes, but you're going to have companies that might want to represent you either in an exclusive or non-exclusive capacity. And what that means is, should you decide to allow them to represent your content, if it's exclusive, they're the only company that you're working with. Sometimes that's important, either to you or to the company who's representing you. Before any of that can happen, before they take your songs and go out, you know, pound the pavement, you do have to have an agreement with the marketing / administration company, right? They're representing you. You're giving them permission to enter deals on your behalf, okay? So it's very important that you have that agreement or understanding beforehand, because you're giving them the right to enter deals on your behalf. You may not be there when certain licensing deals get signed. When you are entitled to whatever percentages your contract stipulates.
As far as, well, up into the 22, so you've been talking a lot about U.S. licensing. I'm wondering what differences there be for international licensing where you may never see the finished work. Say if somebody in Japan says, we feel like to use your song for this movie or this commercial, what's the venue in terms of, in a legal sense? Would the laws of the United States or Japan apply, and then exchange rates where you're thinking you're going to get $500, but you know the exchange rate comes out that it may be 50. So if you just talk about that for a moment.
Sure. Yeah, you know, your question actually brings up a nice amendment to the last question. Is, well, if you want to pursue international licensing opportunities, I mean, obviously you're not going to move to a foreign country just for the sake of licensing songs there. So what's happened is that, you know, these boundaries are much less prohibited than they used to be. So it's very common for companies to pursue licensing deals in other countries where, you know, maybe they're producing, especially like video games or mobile media. You know, I've had songs licensed in Japan and Russia, you know, throughout Europe, and there are some differences. Here's how this works, because when you get into foreign royalties and foreign administration, it gets into a slightly more complex facet of royalty collection and rights. And the truth of the matter is different countries treat copyright differently. I think in the United States, for example, you know, I think we all take it pretty seriously. At least if you're a professional company, I mean, the last thing a film or production company wants to do is include anything where, you know, they're releasing a movie with songs that weren't properly cleared. It creates a potential nightmare, and it's one worth avoiding. But your point is, you know, well, if this happens somewhere else, you know, that's, you know, far away, how do you keep track of it? Well, one thing I'll mention that's interesting is this, that, for example, if you have songs that are included in a movie, right, and it plays in theaters in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen, the performing rights organizations don't pay you anything for theatrical performance, right? However, that's not true if it plays in theaters overseas. So, in that sense, it could be a very good thing for you to have your songs, you know, used in a film score or a soundtrack that's, you know, a big hit somewhere in Europe, for example, or Southeast Asia. The way it's addressed is this: every country has its own performing rights organization. Like the U.S., we have ASCAP, BMI. All countries have you know, at least one dedicated performing rights organization. And the truth of the matter is they work together. You know, we listen to the radio, you hear artists that are, you know, from this country. There's artists from other countries that are also on the radio. So it's sort of like a symbiotic relationship where, you know, different rights organizations actually keep tabs for each other. And as you can imagine, it's a process that, you know, it's not perfect. There's a lot of inefficiency. There's a huge amount of room for mistakes, omissions, and, you know, you and I can't go and, you know, double check the work without, you know, buying a plane ticket and going on a vacation. And it brings up the whole question: is it really worth it, you know, to pursue this? I mean, maybe it is. I guess it would depend. So one thing that a lot of publishing companies and some artists, they hire administration companies that specialize in foreign royalties, and they have sort of a network of relationships in different countries that can double check and make sure that, if something isn't being properly addressed or pursued, they'll chase it down. So if you ever hear of a company that specializes in administration, that's probably what they're doing. They're involved in foreign royalty collection. So, and the rates vary by the way. If you have a song that plays on television in the U.S., it might generate a certain royalty, whereas if it plays in the UK, it might be twice as much or half as much somewhere else. It just depends. So the rates are not the same either.
So we want to look for an administrative company to help you with foreign licensing. Is that the key, or?
The question is it your best bet to find an administrative company to work with on behalf of
Something I would say yes, and the reason for that is simply this: if you, all of us as artists are going to face there's a point of critical mass, and this applies to domestic and foreign affairs. Okay, in other words, you can record your own songs, you can do your own publicity, you can do all these things, right? But you're going to reach a point as you start to experience some success where it becomes bigger than you are, and there's just, you have to make a choice. Are you going to spend your time being an artist, or are you going to spend your time addressing these other issues? So I'd say do as much as you can while you can, but when it comes to, if you have your songs in rotation in other countries, you definitely, for me, I would definitely look to find a reputable administrator that has good contacts in that country or those countries to handle it. They'll do it. They just are more comprehensive than even the performing rights organizations, because they have more to gain or lose if they don't, if they're not active and proactive. I thank you again for having me. I would say this. Keep in mind that when it comes to music licensing, people are fixated on pursuing television networks, and my advice would be the network to pursue is the one that's around you, and form alliances and allegiances with local bands, local artists. I mean, one point that we're not going to have time to address is that there's a lot of really cool opportunities in your your own backyard, so to speak. And I think that's the future of music licensing, which is, working with local companies, local businesses, and what you're providing for them as an artist is a mechanism to get their product or service exposed in new media, like through YouTube or MySpace or Facebook, whatever it is, to give it a hit factor that it may not have otherwise. And that being the case, the most expensive, biggest expense for any company, artist, or form of media is the advertisement and publicity that's required to spread the word. So remember, as an artist, that's something that you can offer somebody potentially, is that you are a self-contained advertising firm in a sense. And if you find companies that are aligned in style or beliefs or pursue them and work together, and you both come out of it winning, and you have the satisfaction of knowing that it's someone that you can deal with directly. So that would be my. If you ask me what I think the future of licensing is, it's more thinking locally, and it's not that international opportunities aren't worth pursuing. It's just that some of the coolest opportunities might be on your street. So. Don't be afraid to consider those, because they are potentially really exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Darren, for taking the time.
You got it.